But first, let's talk about our wide-ranging conversation with President Obama. We walked these halls with him on Monday and talked about tonight's speech, his legacy as president, and the campaign to take over the highest office in the land. You're greeting us on the eve of the State of the Union, your final State of the Union. Are you going to miss the ritual of walking in that room and looking out over a joint session of Congress and members of the cabinet, the Supreme Court, dignitaries up above? Are you going to miss that ritual?
It's a wonderful spectacle. I remember the first time I did it, and you're standing behind the door, and Mr. Speaker, right, the President of the United States, and you walk down that row, and members of both parties are on either side, and they'll shake your hands, and as you said, you see all of government gathered in one place. And
it's the one time of the night where even the opposing side stands and cheers you.
Right. It's not just the cheers. It's a sense of a celebration of democracy. There's no doubt that I will always remember the ritual. Whether I'm going to miss writing the speech leading up to it, I don't know. We'll see how this one goes.
As you stand in that room, you will be looking out over a room that arguably is as divided as it has ever been. Do you see that as a failure of your presidency? You came to town saying it was about hope and change. You were going to change the tone in Washington. You wanted to unite people, and they're not united. Is it a failure?
It's a regret. I could not be prouder of what we've accomplished. And sometimes we look at the past through rose-colored glasses. It's been pretty divided in the past. There have been times where people beat each other with canes, and we had things like the Civil War. So there have been times where it's been pretty rough. But there's no doubt that politics in Washington are so much more divided than the American people are. And part of what I want to do in this last address is to remind people, you know what, we got a lot of good things going for us, and if we can get our politics right, it turns out that we're not as divided on the ideological spectrum as people make us out to be.
And I know in your speech, it's traditional to say the state of our union is strong. When it comes to the emotional state of our union, when I go out and I talk to people, the words I hear them use most often in terms of how they're feeling right now, they talk about fear, they talk about frustration, they talk about fatigue. Any of those words surprise you?
No, I think we went through a lot over these last 10 years. We went through Katrina, we went through the Iraq War, we went through the worst financial crisis in our lifetimes. We are still battling terrorism. People are still recovering from some of the economic blows that hit. And it is sometimes important for us to step back and take measure of how far we've come. The economy right now is doing better than any other economy in the world by a significant margin. We remain the strongest nation on earth by far. And there are no existential threats facing us. But if we make some good choices now, whoever the next president is, whoever's controlling the next Congress, there's no reason why we shouldn't own the 21st century.
You said there's no existential threat facing us. That fear, though, is still incredibly real. And in some ways, it's driving the current presidential campaign. You've got a guy like Donald Trump and others who have recognized and identified that fear. And in some ways, they're running on it. Do you take responsibility for that? And the reason I ask it is, people said after 8 years of George W. Bush in the White House, the American people were hungry for your message of hope and change. So after 7 years of the Obama presidency, do you feel you're responsible for a certain hunger out there for the message that Donald Trump is putting out?
Oh, yeah, the message that Donald Trump's putting out has had adherents a lot of times during the course of our history. Talk to me if he wins. Then we'll have a conversation about how responsible I feel about it. But I'm pretty confident that the overwhelming majority of Americans are looking for the kind of politics that does feed our hopes and not our fears, that does work together and doesn't try to divide us, that isn't looking for simplistic solutions and scapegoating, but looks for us, buckling down and figuring out how do we make things work for the next generation.
So when you stand and deliver that State of the Union address, in no part of your mind or brain can you imagine Donald Trump standing up one day and delivering a State of the Union address?
Well, I can imagine it in a Saturday night skit. Look, anything's possible, and I think we shouldn't be complacent. I think everybody's got to work hard.
Our tour ended in the Oval Office. I would have never guessed in a million years that I would step into the Oval Office, probably the most recognizable office in the world, and step in here with you and say this. What did you make of Sean Penn and El Chapo? Seriously, when you saw that picture of them shaking hands and know that he spent 7 hours interviewing him, what'd you make of that?
Well, first of all, I want to compliment the Mexican government because them capturing him and as we go through an extradition process, potentially, he is disabled, and that affects their ability the Mexican government's ability to really crack down on some of the terrible crimes that are committed by these narco traffickers, I think is important. Now, in terms of how an interview like that gets set up and journalistic ethics, I figure you're probably in a better position to opine on that.
Last question. ISIS is such a huge concern for people. Not only are they carrying attacks out in the Middle East anymore, but they're inspiring attacks in Europe and here in places like San Bernardino, I think even in Philadelphia over the weekend. Your daughters are young ladies. When they get to be your age, President Obama, do you believe in your heart that they'll be living in a world that is dealing with the threat of radical Islam on a daily basis?
I am absolutely confident we will have defeated ISIL. I don't think we have to wait until they're 54 for that to happen. Ultimately, what ISIL represents is a blind alley for the region, and people will recognize that the same way that over time they turned on Al-Qaeda because they saw that this doesn't lead anywhere.
You got a lot on your plate, and you're nice to spend time with me. I
Enjoy.
really appreciate it.
Okay.
Mr. President, thank you.
Happy New Year.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.
There's something kind of cool about standing with the president in the Oval Office.
Not an everyday occurrence for you or me, right?
No, it's true. It's not the only time, by the way, that he spoke about his family. He talked about the balancing act of being president of the United States and being a husband and a father, and we're going to talk more about that. As a matter of fact, in our next part of our conversation, we're also going to have some talk about what he hopes that he can inject into the State of the Union tonight that Americans haven't heard before.
Look forward to that.
By the way, tomorrow, a little perspective from the other side of the aisle. We'll sit down with House Speaker Paul Ryan.
And in a few minutes from now, we're going to hear from Vice President Joe Biden. He'll be here for a live interview. I'm going to step down to the Navy mess and do that in a couple of...
Hello, Today fans. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking that button down there and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives.